The first verdicts in the police Operation Sanctuary. Let's go to Fiona Trott, who's covering that court case. Breaking news, Fiona.
Simon, let me tell you, there have been 2 years of trials here at Newcastle Crown Court, but now the final verdicts are in. So we can tell you all about the sexual exploitation that Northumbria police have uncovered in this city. Between 2010 and 2014, men predominantly of Pakistani, Bangladeshi and Indian origin targeted vulnerable girls and women. They invited them to parties, they gave them drink and drugs, so many drugs that many of those victims couldn't defend themselves, or they became so addicted that they would do anything to get more. Now, just to give you an idea, let me explain the verdicts that have just been returned here today. 20-year-old Abdul Sabe, a man who was already a registered sex offender. He's been found guilty of conspiracy to traffic for sexual exploitation and drugs offences. The court heard how he gave his keys, his house keys, to a girl knowing she was 15 years old. 34-year-old Habiba Rahim has been found guilty of rape, trafficking charges and drugs offences. We heard how he set up a victim. He saw her wandering the streets of Newcastle and offered her a roof over her head. He said that she could stay with him rent-free so long as she didn't tell anybody and she came in through the back door. 44-year-old Mahiba Rahman, he's pleaded guilty to drugs offences and allowing his house to be used for those party sessions. 44-year-old Mahiba Rahman, he pleaded guilty to drugs offences and allowing his house to be used, and 37-year-old Badrul Hussain found guilty of drugs offences and allowing his home to be used for party sessions. Let me explain as well that Rahim, Sabe and Rahman were also found guilty of conspiracy to incite prostitution. That reflects the planning of this. They were all working together to target teenagers and use them for sex. Now, this is typical of what we've heard in these trials over the past 2 years, but they're just one small part of Operation Sanctuary that has been running since 2013. And I can tell you to date, 700 complainants have come forward, around 100 people have been convicted. And as we can now report, of course, 18 of them from these trials here, all of their sentences have totalled around 300 years. Now that reporting restrictions have been lifted, I can also tell you that as part of this investigation, the police used a convicted child rapist as an informant. He was paid around £10,000. Now, we've spoken to the Chief Constable of Northumbria Police about this, and he said, look, full risk assessments were carried out, and he said this: the information we gathered from that individual has put dangerous men behind bars. We've also learned over the past 2 years that 2 of the victims were in care. One of them was trafficked from a children's home. Well, a serious case review is being carried out. It involves social services from both Northumberland and Newcastle Council, and that report is due to be republished at the end of the year. So what we can now tell you today, after 2 years of trials here at Newcastle Crown Court, is that 17 men and 1 woman have been found guilty of sexually exploiting vulnerable girls and women in the Newcastle area, and also guilty of drugs offences too. The 18 people here were arrested after a series of raids in the city. Guilty of causing girls and women serious harm. Caught as part of Operation Sanctuary, one of the biggest sexual exploitation investigations in the north of England. One 17-year-old says she was raped at a party session organised by local men. It's a familiar story.
I woke up in the morning. The wardrobe was pushed up against the door.
Her police interview was played to the court. To protect her identity, we've asked actors to read what the jury saw.
He'd had sex with us while I was asleep. Still now, I'm a bit confused about it.
How do you feel when he told you he'd done that to you?
Dirty, confused.
How many sessions would you say you've been to?
About 60.
22 complainants came forward in this case, and they were from all walks of life. 2 had been in care, 1 had been a college student, and they were all vulnerable in their own way, whether it was their age, 1 was just 14, or they had difficulties at home. Most of them were approached here in the west end of the city. An older man would pull up in an expensive car and offer them drink and drugs or invite them to a party. This was one party house the police raided. Behind these doors, teenage girls were given as many drugs as they wanted and were victimised by older men.
Well, we'll sort it out at the police station, OK?
For this man, it's Judgment Day. He's on his way to court. Later, he's found guilty of drugs offences.
SIM cards, drugs, computers, cash.
Operation Sanctuary started in 2013. It's been a long and complex investigation. Controversially, officers recruited a convicted child rapist as an informant. He was paid around £10,000.
Look, I get entirely that this is very, very difficult for people. Many people will look at that and say it's morally reprehensible, repugnant that the police would pay somebody in those circumstances, a convicted child sex offender, for information. This is the world we have to enter into, and it's shadowy, it's murky, it is full of risks. What I can say is this: the prize that we are seeking and that we gained in this case is that the information we gathered from that individual has put dangerous men behind bars.
Most of the perpetrators were from Pakistani, Indian and Bangladeshi backgrounds.
I mean, some of these men, they're stuck in their ways. But
This city councillor says leaders from all faiths could re-educate some local men to stop similar exploitation in the future.
people should not be telling the Asian community how to live their lives or what to do. And it's quite important. It's just like saying to the white community that we should be talking about what Jimmy Savile did. We should not do that. However, there's a huge opportunity to talk about these issues on a regular basis of rights of women, and I think it's important to use religion, particularly Islam, to educate some of these people.
7 years after the conspiracies began, those who thought it was acceptable to exploit vulnerable girls and women are now awaiting sentence. I can tell you that sentencing is expected next month. In the meantime, 4 people have already been sentenced. One man has been jailed for 10 years after he raped a 15-year-old girl. So just to recap, 18 people guilty at Newcastle Crown Court following 2 years of trials involving sexual exploitation and drugs offences. To give you an idea of this investigation, let me go over those verdicts that we can give you now. 20-year-old Abdul Sabe, a man who's already on the registered sex offenders register, has been found guilty of conspiracy to traffic for sexual exploitation and drugs offences. We heard how he gave a 15-year-old the keys to his flat, knowing how old she was. 34-year-old Habiba Rahim, he was found guilty of rape, trafficking charges and drugs offences. We heard how he set up a victim. She was wandering the streets. He offered her a roof over her head. 37-year-old Badrul Hussain, found guilty of drugs offences and allowing his home to be used for party sessions. And 44-year-old Mahiba Rahman pleaded guilty to drugs offences and allowing his house to be used for sessions too. These 4 trials that have taken place at Newcastle Crown Court over the past 2 years are just one small part of Operation Sanctuary, which started in 2013. And I can tell you to date, 700 complainants have come forward as part of this investigation. Around 100 people have been convicted, including the 18 here today. And their sentences have already totalled over 300 years. And Operation Sanctuary continues in the Northumbria Force area at the moment.
Fiona Trott at Newcastle Crown Court with that breaking story. Thank you very much.